Before Blitzkrieg shocked the world, war followed a completely different rhythm. Slow, grinding, and brutally predictable. When the First World War began in August 1914, generals on both sides expected quick victories. Instead, modern weapons turned the battlefield into a deadlock. Machine guns, heavy artillery, and endless barbed wire made it nearly impossible for armies to advance. By late 1914, soldiers had dug massive trench systems stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland. What followed was not a war of movement, but a war of endurance. In 1916, the true horror of this kind of war became undeniable. At Verdun, beginning on February 21st, German forces under General Erich von Falkenhayn launched a massive offensive against the French. The French defense, organized by General Philippe Pétain, turned the battle into a brutal struggle of attrition that lasted nearly a year. By the time it ended, more than 700,000 soldiers had become casualties. And while Verdun still burned, another disaster unfolded. On July 1st, 1916, British forces under General Douglas Haig launched the Battle of the Somme. On the very first day, the British Army suffered over 57,000 casualties, the worst day in its military history. Months of fighting followed, millions died, and yet the front line barely moved. This was the old way of war. Victory was not about speed, it was about endurance, about grinding the enemy down, even if it meant sacrificing an entire generation. But inside Germany, some officers were already asking a dangerous question. What if the next war didn't have to look like this? What if, instead of months or years, a war could be decided in weeks? After the First World War ended in 1918, Germany faced humiliation, defeat, and severe restrictions. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, drastically limited the German military. The new army, the Reichswehr, could have no more than 100,000 soldiers. Tanks were forbidden. Heavy artillery was restricted. An air force was banned entirely. On paper, Germany had been stripped of the tools of modern war. But inside the German officer corps, something unexpected happened. Instead of rebuilding a massive army, they began studying how to build a smarter one. One of the key figures behind this transformation was General Hans von Seeckt, chief of the German Army Command during the early 1920s. Von Seeckt believed Germany could never again win a long war of attrition like the one that had destroyed Europe between 1914 and 1918. Germany needed speed, decisiveness, shock. Younger officers began exploring new ideas about mobility and combined arms warfare. Among them was a rising officer named Heinz Guderian. Guderian studied the potential of armored vehicles and something even more revolutionary, radio communication inside tanks. Instead of isolated units fighting blindly, armored divisions could now coordinate movements in real time. Tanks would break the front line, motorized infantry would exploit the breach, aircraft would destroy resistance from above. Separate branches of the military would no longer fight independent battles. They would fight as one weapon, a fast, concentrated strike designed to collapse the enemy before he could even react. It was a radical idea, a terrifying one. And soon, the world would see what it could do. At dawn on September 1st, 1939, the world changed. Without a formal declaration of war, German forces crossed the Polish border along a massive front stretching hundreds of kilometers. The invasion was commanded by General Gerd von Rundstedt in the south and General Fedor von Bock in the north. But this was not a traditional invasion. Instead of slowly advancing across the front, German commanders concentrated their most powerful weapon, Panzer divisions. Armored columns smashed through weak points in the Polish defenses, punching holes in the front line. Once the breakthrough was made, the tanks did not stop to secure territory. They kept moving, fast, deep, relentless. Behind them followed motorized infantry, artillery, and supply units, expanding the breach and cutting off Polish formations before they could retreat. Above the battlefield, Juncker's Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers screamed down from the sky. Their mechanical sirens, designed specifically to terrify enemies, echoed across towns, roads, and defensive positions before bombs detonated below. Polish commanders struggled to react. By the time orders reached frontline units, German armored columns were already dozens of kilometers behind them, severing railways, destroying bridges, and isolating entire armies. Within weeks, Polish resistance began to collapse. On September 27th, Warsaw surrendered, and by early October, the campaign was effectively over. A modern European nation had been destroyed in less than 5 weeks. The world watched in shock, but many military leaders still believed Poland had simply been weak. They had no idea that something far more dangerous had just been unleashed. After the fall of Poland, many Allied commanders believed the German success had been exaggerated. Poland, they argued, had simply been unprepared. France would be different. The French army was one of the largest in the world, supported by British forces and protected by one of the most formidable defensive systems ever built, the Maginot Line. Massive fortifications stretched along the German border, designed to stop any invasion cold. But the German High Command had no intention of attacking it. Instead, they prepared a bold and extremely risky plan proposed by General Erich von Manstein. Rather than repeating the strategy of World War I, German forces would strike through the Ardennes forest, a dense, rugged region the Allies believed was nearly impossible for large armored forces to cross. In May 1940, German Panzer divisions pushed through the forest at astonishing speed. Within days, they broke through the Allied front near the Meuse River under the command of General Heinz Guderian. Then the tanks did something unexpected. They didn't stop. German armored columns drove west toward the English Channel, cutting off hundreds of thousands of British and French troops in northern France. The Allied armies were suddenly trapped. What followed was the desperate evacuation known as Dunkirk. Over 330,000 soldiers managed to escape across the Channel, but France itself could not recover. On June 14, 1940, German troops entered Paris. Just 6 weeks after the invasion began, France collapsed. Europe had never seen a campaign move this fast. Blitzkrieg had just shattered one of the most powerful armies in the world, and for a moment, it looked unstoppable. Blitzkrieg was not simply about tanks. Many countries had tanks in 1939. What made the German strategy revolutionary was how everything worked together. At the center of the system were the Panzer divisions, fast, concentrated armored units designed to punch through enemy lines at a single, decisive point. But the real secret was coordination. German tanks were equipped with radio communication, something most other armies still lacked. Commanders like General Heinz Guderian could adjust movements instantly, redirecting entire armored columns in real time as the battlefield changed. Above them, the Luftwaffe provided close air support. Dive bombers such as the Ju-87 Stuka destroyed artillery positions, supply routes, and defensive strongpoints just moments before the armored assault arrived. Once the front line cracked, German forces did not slow down. Motorized infantry and mechanized units rushed through the gap, spreading confusion deep behind enemy lines. Supply depots were destroyed, communication lines severed, entire armies suddenly found themselves surrounded. But Blitzkrieg's most powerful weapon was not speed, it was shock. Command structures collapsed. Orders became outdated within hours. Enemy commanders were constantly reacting to a battlefield that no longer existed. And in war, confusion can destroy an army faster than bullets. For a short time, Blitzkrieg seemed unstoppable. Poland had fallen in weeks, France in barely 6. Across Europe, German armored forces moved faster than any army had ever moved before. But Blitzkrieg had one critical weakness. It depended on speed, fuel, coordination, and above all, a quick victory. In June 1941, Germany launched its most ambitious campaign yet, Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Nearly 3 million German soldiers crossed the border in the largest military invasion in history. At first, Blitzkrieg seemed to work again. Soviet armies were encircled. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners were taken. German Panzer groups advanced hundreds of kilometers into Soviet territory, but the Soviet Union was not France. The distances were enormous. Supply lines stretched dangerously thin, and Soviet forces kept fighting, even after devastating losses. As the months passed, the lightning war began to slow. Mud clogged roads, fuel ran short, winter arrived, and the Red Army began to recover. The final turning point came in 1942 to 1943 at the brutal Battle of Stalingrad. There, the German advance stopped completely. For the first time, the war machine built on speed and shock was forced into the kind of grinding battle it had been designed to avoid. The lightning had faded, and the war had become something far longer and far deadlier. Blitzkrieg did more than win battles. It changed how the world understood war. Before 1939, many generals still believed future conflicts would look like the First World War, slow, grinding battles of trenches and attrition. But Blitzkrieg proved something different. Speed could be a weapon. Coordination could collapse entire armies, and confusion could defeat an enemy before the battle was even fully understood. Even today, modern military doctrines still carry pieces of the same idea: rapid maneuver, combined arms, and overwhelming shock. But history also delivered a warning. Blitzkrieg worked best against enemies that collapsed quickly, against a nation willing to endure, adapt, and fight a long war. Lightning alone was not enough. The strategy that conquered Europe in months could not survive a war of years. And that raises an interesting question. If Blitzkrieg had never existed, would World War II have become another slow, endless trench war like 1914? Or would another strategy have changed warfare anyway? I'm curious what you think. Let me know your opinion in the comments. And if there's another moment in history you'd like to see explored in this series. Because sometimes the most fascinating stories in history are the ones that changed the world in an instant.